Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here for another episode of Novel at Home. I did not know that we'd still be doing this at home in 2021, but here we are. So glad you all are willing to join us from your couch or your office or wherever you are. I've seen people join from their cars before, on their walks. We don't judge. So I'll just give it a second for everyone to kind of get in the room. The way this will work is we are going to have Sid Evans and Elizabeth Passarella in conversation. And you guys, if you want to take a look at the bottom of your screen or top, there's a Q&A box. If you have a specific question for these guys, you can enter that in there and they'll get to that at the very end. If you have shout outs, want to say hello, commentary, jokes, whatever, you can pull up the chat box in that same little bar down there and feel free to put that in there. I'll also be dropping a link to purchase the book in case you haven't done that already. Although lots of you have, you're awesome, you pre-ordered with us. This is the way we are able to continue to do awesome events like this. So thank you very much. Just gonna give it another second. Okay, I think everyone's getting kind of situated. We are so grateful to have hosting tonight with us Sid Evans, who is editor-in-chief at Meredith Corporation's little pamphlets called Southern Living and Coastal Living. You might have heard of those before. So thank you so much for being here. He is originally from Memphis, but you're now in Birmingham, I believe.
Yeah. And thanks for having me. I love being a part of this.
We really appreciate it. And of course, the star of our evening is the amazing Elizabeth Passarella, who is a contributing editor at Southern Living, writes their Social Graces column, and has appeared in a bazillion publications. As a former editor at Vogue. And now we've got her tales of being are you a former Southerner, or how do we say that?
I think I'm still a Southerner at heart, but I'm equal parts New Yorker. We'll get to that. I'm going to read.
Right. Yes, it is talking about in the book. Yes, so Elizabeth is from Memphis. I'm sure we have everyone from family, friends, but also lots of folks who are just coming to meet her tonight. Again, if you haven't gotten a copy of the book yet, we've got them on display in the store. She was kind enough to sign book plates for us. So they've got autographed book plates in them. And I will let these two take it away. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
Nicole.
you. Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you everybody who's out there that I can't see, but is joining us tonight. I'm sure there's a lot of people I know, a lot of people that know Sid. But we are really thrilled to be able to talk to you and to talk to each other. So I hope that everyone has a cocktail. This is an online cocktail party. I know that the cocktail recipe we sent you is a little bit complicated, so you might just have a glass of wine. That's all good too. But anyway, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much to Sid for talking to me and putting up with me in a lot of ways in my career. So cheers to you, Sid. Cheers to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. So yes, I'm going to start by reading a little bit from the book, and not a full chapter. I'm reading about half a chapter, and then Sid and I will talk. He has some questions for me, and then yeah, we would love to take questions from you all. They don't have to be just for me. They can also be for Sid. And at the very end, before everyone leaves, Nicole is going to come back, and she is actually going to pick a lucky winner. It's like a game show. We're going to pick a lucky winner from the audience, and so I will send you a signed book if you want one, if you don't already have one or haven't already bought one from Novel. And a little treat from New York, maybe some Levan cookies, which are the greatest cookies in New York. I will take your bagel order and send you absolute bagels from my favorite bagel place. So stick around. She's going to pick a winner at the very end. Okay, so cheers, everybody. Take a sip. And I'm going to read a little bit from the book. Now, I know my audience, so I'm going to refrain from talking about politics or my sex life in this reading to you guys. Instead, I'm going to read from chapter 13, which is called Southern Manners and an Identity Crisis. So here we go. For Southerners living in New York, there comes a point where you have to decide which it's going to be. If you live here for 3 to 5 years after college before moving back to the South, you've chosen. You're a Southerner who lived in New York. If you stay, like I have, especially if you pass over the imaginary line of having lived in the city longer than you lived in your hometown, like I have, which is wild, then you are a New Yorker. I once heard the author Helen Ellis, who grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, but has lived in New York for 25 years, say, "I'm a New Yorker with a Southern accent." I don't even have that much of an accent anymore, other than the way I say Thanksgiving, accent on the thanks, which you all know. So I'm a New Yorker, full stop. Some people like me, New Yorkers, nay Southerners, hold on to sentimental traditions or foods, small talismans of their former lives. My friends Merritt and Patricia, who are from Nashville and Austin, respectively, have certain food items shipped in. Merritt orders a turkey from Greenberg Smoked Turkey in Tyler, Texas, every Thanksgiving. And Patricia's mother sends her an Easter ham from New Braunfels Smokehouse outside San Antonio. My sister has gifted us Benton's bacon, which comes from the Tennessee Smoky Mountains. And once I ordered Sister Schubert's Parker House rolls, but the cost of shipping could have covered one of my children's college tuition, so I never did it again. On a shelf in my kitchen lived Junior League cookbooks from various Southern cities: Houston, Birmingham, Raleigh, Memphis, but I rarely pull them down. I cook a few of my grandmother's standbys, like her cobbler, but I don't get all weepy about them. Other transplants I know hold on to their Southernness by wearing pearls or signet rings or proper lipstick. And, well, I never did that much with much success, even when I lived in the South. My look has always been less ladylike and more menswear inspired, if the men who inspired me were old and retired and wore a lot of pajamas and Birkenstocks. The one area I didn't become a complete embarrassment to my people was manners. I have excellent Southern manners. I gave up being a Republican, but you'll have to pry my thank you notes on monogram stationery from my cold, dead hands. When I got married in 2005, I reluctantly included response cards with the invitations, even though I'd been trained to write a separate note on my own stationery as a wedding RSVP, worded thusly: Elizabeth Passarella accepts with pleasure your kind invitation for Saturday, June 16th. Or, Elizabeth Passarella regretfully declines your kind invitation for Saturday, June 16th. Notes like these have gone the way of the hoop skirt, I believe. Even the most traditional Southern brides include response cards with check boxes now. But I like knowing that I know that. My most marketable Southern skill is the ability to make killer small talk. How is that related to manners exactly? It is in the sense that I learned to make killer small talk by being expected over many years of my childhood to come downstairs when my parents had company, say hello, to shake hands with their friends, answer a bunch of questions about how school was going, and then disappear back to my room like a Von Trapp. To most non-Southern parents reading this, that may sound demeaning or old-fashioned, but they should watch me work a room. I credit this skill with getting me my first jobs in newspapers and magazines. I'd walk into an interview, make excellent eye contact, shoot the breeze, tell a funny self-deprecating story, another Southern specialty, and send a prompt thank you note. I'm not saying other people can't send thank you notes, but, well, I've received thank you notes for my thank you notes. Occasionally, I get a little big for my britches, and my manners get me into trouble. On the subway, for example. If I see someone holding an international guidebook or leaning and squinting toward the subway map on the side of the train car, trying to determine where he's going, I am like a dog who spots someone holding a tennis ball from 75 yards away. It's my calling to be a subway Sherpa, if you will, a fellow passenger with Walmart greeter levels of enthusiasm and knowledge. My need to give people directions goes beyond just trying to be helpful. I feel responsible for making sure New York City puts its best face forward. And the subway can be confusing, especially on weekends when there's construction and certain lines don't follow their prescribed routes. If that German-speaking family of 6 stays on the Orange D train instead of switching to the Orange B, I say to myself, they will go express from Columbus Circle to 125th Street, which they may not want to do. And then they might think badly of my city, which I take personally. So I smile at the family and give them a look that says, I'm ready to jump in should they need me. Sometimes I offer outright. And then after we've muddled through language barriers and I feel confident that they know what to do, we sit awkwardly for a few stops, me continuing to smile intermittently until their stop comes. And I motion for them like a maitre d'. This is your stop. Yes, here, the Natural History Museum. Goodbye, you're welcome, have a good time. That's the best outcome. But I have a terrible sense of direction, even when it comes to public transportation. My bearings get jumbled, even more so under pressure, and I forget which subway lines go where. In my haste to be a cheery mouthpiece for the Metropolitan Transit Authority, I sometimes give people bad information. I can't help it. I get frazzled. Does the B go all the way to the 2nd Avenue on the Lower East Side, or do they need to switch to the F? Oh crap, Williamsburg, 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 Williamsburg. It's the L, it's the L. That sounds right. They get the L at 23rd Street. Wait, no, 14th. All of this goes through my mind while these nice tourists are looking at me expectantly, and I consider texting Michael, my husband, but I'm underground and running out of time. I give an answer, the tourists get off, and then I spend my entire ride home convinced I sent them to Queens. Things are easier when I run into a group of Southerners. They are easy to spot, mostly because they tend to talk loudly in familiar accents. Southern tourists, families, girls' trips, a gaggle of grandmothers up here to see Phantom, are my Olympics. I get to excel at all my favorite things, showing off my good manners, talking to strangers, and putting in some good PR for my city. Excuse me, where are y'all trying to go? I say, turning up my accent and hitting hard on the y'all. Oh, goodness, honey, we were looking for the Majestic Theater. Is it the Majestic? Carol, Majestic? This is another way you know you are dealing with a tourist, usually a Southerner over the age of 50. When they give you the name of a building or an address, we're going to 245 West 44th Street instead of an intersection or a cross street. New Yorkers say, we're going to 44th and 8th. Where y'all visiting from, I ask, already dooming myself to wasting enough time with small talk that I'll inevitably panic when it's time to tell them where to get off. We're from Mississippi, from Jackson. Oh, my mom is from Mississippi. She grew up in a small town near Tupelo called Ripley. I grew up in Memphis. Y'all, did you hear that? She's from Memphis. Where did you say your mom? Ripley? Carol, Ripley. Tick-tock. Now, do you live here? She asks. I do. I've been here almost 20 years. I just love it. And this is where I get one of two different responses. Either, I can see why, we're just having a ball, or your poor mama. I quickly explain that they should get off the B train and switch to the C or the A, which will take them to 42nd and 8th Avenue, where they'll be a couple of blocks away. I think she said she lives here, I heard one of them say incredulously as they exit. I do. I live here, ladies. Have a great night. I'm 70 to 80% sure I sent you to the right theater.
So great, Elizabeth.
Thank you. The next half is about how my children have bad manners or how we're working on it. We'll get to that another time.
Well, listen, as someone who has been on that subway before and who lived in New York for a long time, I've run into Carol before many times, and you probably handled it much better than I did.
I don't know about that.
Well, listen, I just want to say, first of all, thanks for having me. It is such an honor to be here for this event. It's the launch day for the book.
It is.
Which is so exciting, and it is such a wonderful book. I mean, I just absolutely loved it, and I got to say, you know, you're really one of my favorite writers. I so look forward to your columns for Southern Living. Anytime I see your byline on anything, but you know, when I get a column that comes in through email, you know, this is like why I became an editor, is because, you know, I get excited about a great piece, and, you know, most of the, 90% of the other stuff that I do is not that fun, but having that email come in with your column I can just sit there and read it, and it's always funny and so smart. And So anyway, I'm a big fan. So thanks for
I
having
chose
me.
the right editor to do this event with me. Thank you, Sid.
So, well, congrats on the book. And I just want to start off just asking you, why'd you want to write this book? And also, how did it happen? It's not easy to get a book published these days or any ever. So how did it come to be?
Well, why I wrote the book. I don't know, Southern Living doesn't pay the bills, Sid. I got to make a little more money. I've always wanted, I think every writer, anybody who does any kind of professional writing always wants to write a book. But as for how this came about in this particular book, it was really a lot had to do with my agent, who was a former magazine editor as well, Kristen, who is an old work colleague and friend. And she was a literary agent, and were kind of talking about possible book ideas, if I'd ever had any ideas for things I wanted to write. And this is the kind of book I love to read. Personal essays have always been the kind of books that I love to read. I love reading things that are funny and humorous stories. I love reading real life stories. Even the fiction I tend to gravitate towards, I feel like always has an aspect of it that feels like it could be very realistic or people that I know. So I knew I wanted to write this type of book. I knew I wanted to write sort of the personal narrative essay book. But when I thought about what I was passionate about, I'm passionate about New York. I'm passionate about being from the South. I'm passionate about raising kids in sort of a small space. We live in a small apartment. And we were having this discussion about the things that I might want to write about. And she kind of looked at me and said, yes, but it's very New York centric. And you're going to need to appeal to all these people in the middle of the country, evangelical Christians living in the middle of the country. And I thought, okay, I can do that. So it just all really fell into place. It was very much, she brought up this idea and I sort of explained more of my experience and my background to her. And she said, well, that's what you should write about. And it was scary at first. This wasn't necessarily the book that I set out wanting to write. But as I started and, just as a little bit of information about sort of talking about getting a book deal with nonfiction, you usually sell a book on a proposal. You write a few chapters, you give them an outline, you let them know, who you are, and usually you have a background in publishing and so I sat down to write a few chapters and it just came really easily. And that's kind of how I knew it was the right decision and the right thing to write about. And every door just opened really easily. The words came out really easily. And I think my sense of humor and a sense of vulnerability and kind of paired well together, and it just resonated. And so that is how I ended up writing this particular book. And Kristen's very talented, and she sold it. So we. Yeah.
And Kristen is just a fabulous editor and a friend. I consider her a friend and someone I've looked up to for a long time as an editor. She's just, so wonderful.
Yeah. It really helps that when your literary agent is also an incredible writer herself. She has a book coming out this spring and a really great editor, because I just knew that everything I sent her, she wasn't just thinking of it in terms of sales. She was thinking of it in terms of, being great writing too. So that was really helpful. I'm very lucky.
Yeah. Well, so Elizabeth, I want to go back to Memphis and kind of to your early days in Memphis. You and I have a lot in common. We're both from Memphis. We both lived in New York for a long time. You're still there. I'm now down south, back in Birmingham. But I went to MUS. And you went to St. Mary's, which were, sibling brother and sister schools. And I think they were both known for having great writing teachers, great teachers in general. And I'm just wondering how St. Mary's kind of prepared you for the career that you've had and prepared you to write this book.
Oh, I love St. Mary's so much. So St. Mary's prepared me for a lot in life, not just writing skills, but it gave me my dearest friends who are in this book. The people that I write about in this book, a lot of them I've known since pre-K, and we went from pre-K all the way through 12th grade together. So it gave me my closest friends who are like my family. And so that was probably the biggest influence on my life. But I would say, yes, I knew that writing was my skill. I knew that that's what I was good at, that if I was going to do something, that was what I felt it came easily to me. I enjoyed it. I was good at it, really young. And I think St. Mary's had a lot of teachers that saw that in me and encouraged it. And I remember writing letters to the editor in the newspaper when I was in junior high or high school, and getting one of those published, and that was thrilling. And some teacher encouraged me to do that. There were, essay writing contests that I entered, and those were always things that that seemed to be, that's where my talent lay. It was not in calculus or biology, I don't think. So yes, I mean, St. Mary's, I also think the most important thing it gave me was just being at an all-girls school, especially in the time. And I write about this in the book too, because my kids do not go to that kind of environment. My kids go to a huge public school in New York City that's co-ed. And I, wrestled a lot with sending my children to a very different environment that I grew up in, when the one that I went to, the school that I went to, I love so much. But being at an all-girls school, especially in, the 80s in the South, to have an environment, friends, teachers, administrators, everybody there that really just empowered girls, told us we could do anything, told us we were as smart as boys, we were capable of anything, was really huge. I mean, I just think that I never, ever lacked self-confidence. And part of that came from my parents and my friends, but it also came from St. Mary's.
Yeah. Was there one teacher in particular that you remember, or too many?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, there are a lot of teachers that I remember. Well, I write a story in the book about, in second grade, I wrote these insane Mother's Day stories for my mother that all had to do with death and torture and sort of like disappearing children and all this stuff. And my teacher that year was Miss Strock, Cindy Strock. I'm sure she thought I was nuts, but anyway, I do remember that was a big writing year for me. I really stretched myself. And then of course I had Miss Gill in high school, which everybody at St. Mary's remembers Miss Gill. She was sort of our fearless leader in English in high school.
So, and then you went to UNC, right? To Chapel Hill.
Mm-hmm.
So did you start to really go down the journalism path when you got to UNC?
Yeah, immediately. I mean, that's what I knew. I wanted to go to UNC because my sister went there. And she loved it, and she met a really nice man. And I thought, well, maybe I'll get a boyfriend if I go to North Carolina. I did not, for the record, but it had a great journalism school. And the nice thing about Carolina is that you can start journalism school in your junior year. So you finish your undergraduate with a journalism degree, and even though you're in class with grad students who are getting their master's in journalism, you get it as an undergrad. So it was just amazing. I mean, the journalism school there is great, and I had fantastic teachers. Now, it's funny, I was taking classes on editorial writing, and it was very print focused. I can remember we were making a website, and it was like we were doing, neuroscience or rocket science. I mean, it was so foreign to make a website or write for the web. And of course, that's our whole world now, is we're all writing on the web and doing all that. But it was a very old school. I was a print journalism major. So it was a lot of newspaper crafting, I did a lot of copy editing. I was almost a copy editor. So I did a lot of headline writing and sort of even just spacing the headlines so that the breaks fell in the right places. I mean, those are all the skills that I learned, and that's how old I am.
Yeah. So I got to say that just the fact that you found the time to write this book is kind of amazing. You talk a lot in the book about living a pretty hectic life. You've got 3 kids in a relatively small New York apartment. Mm-hmm. How did you do it? I mean, mm-hmm. How did you find the headspace and the time to be able to actually sit down and, think for more than, 5 minutes and get it done?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I wrote this book before the pandemic began. I turned it in. The manuscript was due in January of 2020. So had I had to write this book this past year, it would have been I'm not sure I would have done it, because obviously, like so many women in the world, most of us are the ones giving up our work time to homeschool our kids and be around. So I'm not sure it would have happened this year, but I was lucky that this book was written mostly in the summer and fall of 2019. But it was my job. I worked 4 days a week. And I had to get out of my apartment. And the public library that I usually went to and wrote a lot at closed for renovations. So I joined a lovely, it's like a hidden gem in New York. It's called the New York Public Library, New York Society Library, sorry. It's on the East Side. It's very reasonable. It's much less than WeWork or any other sort of office sharing space. And they have old dusty desks in the stacks, and it's incredibly quiet and secluded, and there's nobody else around, and there's no distractions, and you can't use your phone. So 4 days a week I went there, and you know, I had lots of childcare. And over the summer, my children went to every summer camp and day camp that was offered. And that's, I spent my advance on summer camp. That's what I did, you guys.
But you didn't send them away for 8 weeks like a lot of Southerners.
No,
do.
if I could have, I would have. They were a little younger when I started this, but I would have.
Well, hats off to you for getting it done. And it's, I know how hard that must be. So
it was fun. It was fun. I think when you're doing something you really love and the project is exciting, it was fun. I had a blast writing this book.
Yeah, well, it shows. It really does. Every page it shows. Elizabeth, you talk a lot about, your faith, and being a devout Christian in New York. And that's really kind of at the, really the root of the book in a lot of ways. And, it's very different, being a devout Christian in New York than it is in, say, Birmingham or Memphis. I mean, when we moved to Birmingham, one of the first questions you get is, where do you go to church? I mean, right away. But, as someone who goes to church almost every week, I think, right? In New York?
Yes. Are you talking about me or you? Yes.
You. Yeah.
Okay.
That's not as common. And people probably go, really? You're going to church again? Didn't you go last week? How did you kind of navigate that, or how do you navigate that?
Yes, it's even more interesting when you say to the magazine where you're freelancing in office, I can't come on Mondays because I lead a Bible study for my mom's group and I'm really committed to that. So I can't be at the office on Mondays. Well, I would say my husband always laughs when we go to Memphis and we're driving around, and he doesn't anymore because he's been married to me for a very long time. But he says, God, there's a church on every block. There is literally a church on every block. I mean, how are there enough people to fill up all these churches? And that's not the case in New York. But I will say that, number one, there has been a lot of growth of churches, and I feel like Christians and the community growing in New York since I've lived here for the past 21 years, maybe as it used to be. And my faith has really grown in New York, as opposed to, I grew up, my dad was Jewish, but I grew up in a Christian home. My mom, she really took charge of our spiritual upbringing. And I really feel like, though, my faith really grew in New York precisely because it wasn't the norm. Because you had to sort of explain yourself a little bit more, because not everybody's just going to church because it's what they do. If you're going to church, it's because you actually really want to go. And getting my kids my daughter always says, well, Mom, things were easier for you because when you were growing up, all your friends were Christians and none of mine are, or, only one or two of mine are. And she's right. It's different. It's not just it's not part of the culture for her in her public school. It's not part of the culture necessarily for me in my community with my neighbors or with work colleagues or with school parents. So I think in some sense, though, that really makes you wonder if it's really important, because there's not going to be anybody shaming you for not showing up at church in New York. So, New York also, I think this is something that I talk about, or is sort of an underlying theme in the book, is the sense of identity. Where do you put your identity? New York will give you a lot of sexy things to put your identity in. There's a lot of money to be made here. There's people come here for fame, for dance or music or the performing arts or finance or whatever it is. And there's a lot of things that you can latch onto for your identity. And I think that for a Christian, if you're going to put your identity in sort of who you are as a Christian and in your faith, it's really countercultural in New York. So you have to really be committed to that. So I think it actually helped my faith grow being in New York.
And do you feel like you've really found a community of like-minded people in New York?
There's no like-minded people, I feel like, in New York. I feel like everybody in New York has different opinions about everything. But yes, for the most part, we have a church that we love, that's in our neighborhood. It's hard right now, as it is for everybody, because we're all having church remotely, or a lot of us are. Our kids aren't going to Sunday school, and it's hard to get them on Zoom. But yes, for the most part, sure. I mean, the beautiful thing is, this is what sometimes New York feels like, a small town. I mean, we will run into a family at school. So maybe a new family moved to New York and their kids are in the same class, and we'll be talking to the mom and blah, 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 blah. And the next thing you know, we see them at church. And so God just works in crazy ways like that. I mean, you will see Christians pop up in places that are unexpected, and it's not surprising to me anymore. So, but yeah, we have a great community of school friends, families in our neighborhood, and we've been going to the same church pretty much for the past 20 years.
Wow, that's great. So Elizabeth, this book is kind of a love letter to New York in a lot of ways. You clearly love it. I loved it when I lived there. I mean, what's not to love about New York? But you also have had your challenges. And there's some very funny stories in here about those challenges. I mean, the rat in your apartment, getting stuck on an elevator. I'm just wondering, was there ever any doubt? Was there ever a breaking point for you where you kind of thought, okay, this is like the last straw?
I haven't hit it yet. I don't know. I mean, I never say never, but nope, I haven't. I really haven't hit a point. I mean, I guess maybe when I first moved here, I didn't necessarily think I would stay for as long as I've stayed. But you're right. The book is a love letter to New York. It's also kind of a love letter to my family. I met my husband about a year after I moved here, and he is a New Yorker. So, I think there are the challenging things about living in New York, especially about raising kids in New York, becomes a lot easier and a lot more palatable for me, because it's his hometown. So when there's something that seems strange to me, he's like, that's not strange. I did that when I was in the 3rd grade. So I think that has definitely smoothed some of the rougher edges for me, but I have not hit the breaking point yet. We are really close to growing out of our apartment. We really could use a 3-bedroom. So if we could all just send up some prayers for that, that'd be great. But I think we got a few more months.
So you have a whole chapter in the book where you kind of go through all the different questions about what it's like to live in New York and what it's like to live in a 1,200 square foot apartment.
Got it.
With 3 kids. I mean, do you still get a lot of questions about things like laundry? How do you deal with laundry? That kind of thing.
We do. I mean, I think probably the most common question we get is sort of like, where does the baby sleep? When the answer is, he sleeps in a closet. It is a large closet. He sleeps in a closet. And kind of, how long can your kids share rooms? I think we do get that a lot. And people are very curious about where we put bikes and scooters and stuff. For the most part, we just don't have as much stuff as you guys have. We pare down a lot, and things get stored in the basement, and some things are in the trunk of our car. You get creative, but yeah, I would say that the most questions we get are about where our children sleep and how many of them there are in a bedroom, which is currently about to be 3 if this baby crawls out of his crib.
So speaking of kids, I mean, do you feel like your kids have a strong connection to Memphis, and do they identify as Southern in some ways?
They do for sure. I think they're really proud of it, which is cute, and which I love. We spend a fair amount of time in Memphis. We're there, 2 or 3 times a year, 2 times a year, not currently, but they love Memphis. And they love the food, and they have friends there. I mean, my good friends who I grew up with have kids their ages, and they know them, and they like seeing them once or twice a year, and they talk to them on Marco Polo or FaceTime. And so they do have a lot of connection. Of course, my mom is there. And it's funny, my kids, at least once a year, one of the children has a project at school where they are supposed to talk about their ancestry or the culture that they came from. Now, this is New York, and it is a public school. So we would come to third grade or second grade or whatever it is, and everyone's bringing, a lot of times they'll have a potluck. So you're coming to school with a dish from your culture. And there are children with amazing, a dish from Colombia, a dish from Japan, a dish from, Venezuela. And my children bring pulled pork with Corky's barbecue sauce on it. And they tell everybody that their culture is Southern and that's the food from their mother's culture. So I have made more crock pot pork shoulders. And of course, it's such a bad replica too. I mean, it's a crock pot. It's not smoked. It's not authentic at all. But yeah,
they don't know the difference. They don't know the difference.
They don't know the difference. I can't even tell you how many times I've been asked for the recipe too. A lot of times I've been asked for the recipe. So my kids think that their culture is Southern.
All right, I want to just interject here that if anybody has a question that you want to put in to the chat, to the Q&A, please go ahead. And I've got a couple more for Elizabeth, and then we'll get to some questions from y'all. There is one though. Someone is asking what you miss the most about the South. Oh, and what I miss about NYC.
Hey, you go first. What do you miss about New York?
Oh boy. I mean, really, I miss the people. And I miss my friends that I made when I was there. So many good friends, and really lifelong friends that, we will always have. We're friends with their kids, and I miss the contact with them. I miss contact with people in general.
Right.
So, but that's one thing I really miss.
Yeah.
So what about you?
What do I miss about the South? So the food, I miss the food a lot. I miss barbecue so much. You cannot get good barbecue in New York, although Sid, you and I have eaten last time you were in New York and we actually met in person. We ate at Blue Smoke, which is pretty good, but it's still not great. Still not authentic.
It's fun for New York. It's fun. Yeah.
It's fine for New York. I miss the food. I mean, I think that the thing, and this drives my kids crazy because I just love making small talk with strangers. I love having that little banter back and forth with the cashier at a store. And I don't think in New York, it's not that people aren't friendly. I definitely think that's a stereotype. People in New York are super friendly. They're just in a hurry. They do not want to talk to you for 2 minutes while you're paying for your coffee or your Chick-fil-A sandwich or whatever it is. People are just moving. They're moving quickly. So I think that slightly slower pace, I wouldn't want it all the time, but I do really miss those little interactions, talking with people on the street, running into someone, talking with someone while you're standing in line. There's just an easy chit chat that goes on between strangers. And listen, I am an extrovert and I love talking to strangers. I basically wrote a book so that I could go on a book tour and talk to strangers. So this is the best it's going to get for me. And yet it's so sad. Maybe when the paperback comes out, I'll go on a big tour. But I love that. I love talking to people. I love talking to strangers. So I miss that a lot. And I miss my friends and my mom.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of your mom and just, family in general. So it's always a little dangerous when you're writing about family. And I know this from experience, from, frequently putting them into my column without asking. But I'm just wondering, this is a very, honest book. You don't pull any punches, and there's a lot of, there's a lot in here that's kind of hard. And I'm just wondering if you kind of prepared your family for what was coming, and then how'd you do that?
I read a great article by Harrison Scott Key, who is he was briefly a Memphian. He grew up in Mississippi, but is the author of several hilarious books. But he said, when writing about your family, you just need to make sure they're all dead before you do it. I did not do that. So, with my kids, I did not prepare them at all. I just am exploiting them, and they can deal with it later in therapy. So far, of course, my oldest child is 11, and she steals the book and takes it to bed with her and reads it without my permission. So she has read all kinds of things I did not want her to read, but we're working through it. It's fine. So far, it's been fine. Okay, moving outward a little bit from the circle. My husband, fortunately, is an incredibly confident, and he has a great sense of humor, and never had a problem. He read every single thing before I even sent it to my agent, my editor, anybody. He read everything many, many times. He reads everything I write. And I told him, you know, if you're not comfortable with something, you want to veto anything, that's fine. There was one thing he vetoed in the entire book. I won't tell you what it is. It was in the fighting chapter. And he's like, please don't say that. And so I took it out, but that was it. He is incredibly easygoing and doesn't care, and is just, he's an open book too. So that worked out well. In terms of my parents, no, I did not let my mom or dad read any of it until it was done. And you know, as I said to my mom when I handed her the manuscript, and my dad passed away right before the manuscript was finished, and so he never read it. So I just assumed he would have loved every word, because I can assume that now because he's not here to contradict me. But when I gave my mom the manuscript, listen, she knows me. She has lived with me. She gave birth to me. She's known me my whole life. So I don't think in any way she was surprised that there were things that I was going to say that she would never say. She is very private. She would never share some of the things that I'm sharing, but she knows me well enough to know that that's who I am. And as I said to her, when I gave it to her, I said, listen, the person that comes out looking the worst is me in every situation. So if I'm going to tell an embarrassing story about the family, the person who's going to look like the biggest Yahoo is me. And I think that that's true. I think that when I'm telling a story about whether it's with my kids or my husband or my mom or anybody, the person that I feel like is always the most exposed and the person who comes off looking the most flawed is always me. And I think that makes it easier.
So, you know, you tell some pretty painful stories in this book. And I won't, you know, I won't get into what they are, but it's, you know, some pretty challenging stuff. But you do it with a kind of sense of humor that I think tells the reader it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this together, kind of. And I'm just wondering, when you sat down and started writing, did you kind of know you were going to go there with this book?
Yes, I think, I mean, I will unveil a couple of things. I mean, I do talk about my dad's death at the end of the book. I feel like when he passed away, it was literally 2 weeks before the manuscript was due. And I had talked about him so much in the book. And now I'm going back and trying to make things past tense. And it was heartbreaking, and it was so new, and he had just died. And I wrote about that. I felt like I had to. And I write about miscarriage. I write about pregnancy loss in this book, and just disappointment in a lot of areas. I mean, disappointment in marriage, disappointment in being not the parent you thought you were going to be. But I have just always had a really easy time talking about hard stuff. And I think that, I mean, I'm sure there are some therapists out there in the audience who can analyze this, but I use humor to get through those things. That's just always how I've been wired. So when I'm in a difficult situation, humor is just a way that I deal with it. And it always has been. So that was never really a challenge or a surprise to me. I do think, you know, I'll be honest, I do think that there's going to be people that read certain hard things and feel like I'm making light of it, or feel like I'm brushing over something, or I'm taking something that they have experienced that was really traumatic and I'm making a joke, or I'm brushing it off or making it funny. And listen, I mean, it's my story, and that is kind of how I deal with things, but that's just always how I've been.
Well, I want to ask you one more question, and then we can open it up and take some through the chat. But you know, it's really a book about faith, and I think it's about seeing people as complex human beings, whether they're Southern or whether they're, you know, New Yorkers. and I told you before we did this that, you know, we agreed that we didn't want to get into politics with everything that's going on right now. And we've got a fraught time in our country, and we got an inauguration tomorrow. And so there's all of that. But I'm just wondering, what are your hopes? What are you hoping that people will take away from this book? You know, right now at this time, when there's just so much tension and so much anxiety in this country, and a lot of it is about, you know, people who see someone else as different, as not like them. But it seems to me like a lot of what this is about is sort of bridging that gap.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, for starters, I just think we could all use a laugh. It's been a hard year. There's a lot going on, like you said. So I feel like I wanted to write a funny book. I wanted to write a book that would bring people a lot of joy and told good stories that would be entertaining. So that's the very baseline that I hope it just brings people joy and makes
Mission accomplished.
Okay, good. But beyond that, you know, I talked a little bit before about identity, and, you know, we all put our identity in something. And that might be politics, that might be your political party, it might be, you know, being the perfect mother or the perfect wife, or in your career, or how, you know, far you get in life in a certain area. And I think all of those things at some point are going to disappoint you. And so, you know, for me, talking about this book being a lot about my faith, that's where my identity is. So I can screw up all these other things. I can change my mind. I can make a different decision than my parents. I can fail spectacularly in this area or that area, and it doesn't crush me because my identity is not rooted in those things. And so I would want people to maybe take away that they might just think about that a little bit, think about kind of where you're putting your identity in that sense. But also, listen, I'm a Southerner in New York. I mean, not that I go around the streets of New York announcing that I'm an evangelical Christian, but I definitely talk about my faith. And I want people from New York to kind of, you know, they have a certain idea of what a Christian is like. And I want to be a different example of that, or at least a loving and sort of collaborative example of that for them and their community. And I want people from the South to think, how do you live in New York? How do you raise 3 children in New York in a small apartment? What's it like being a Christian in New York? That's weird. To read my stories and see, oh, it's actually the things that she struggles with, I struggle with, and the things that she succeeds at, I succeed at, or the things that she's worried about, I'm worried about, so that we can just realize that we have a lot in common. And you know, I also, like you said, I'm very vulnerable. I talk a lot about the ways I screw up, and whether or not other people talk about it in public, like I do, we're all making these mistakes. And I just feel like that's part of life. And, you know, you shouldn't feel alone in that.
Well, it's just wonderful, and I just loved every word of it. And I mean, I just got to hold it up there. I mean, it's just a fabulous book. I
went to try to find, I've not gotten my Southern Living. I went to try to find a Southern Living so I could reciprocate and hold up the Southern Living. The Barnes & Noble on the Upper West Side does not have it yet, Sid. But it's redesigned and it's gorgeous. And I know that took a lot of work.
Well, it'll be there soon enough. So, all right, a couple questions. Question from Murph. What is your favorite chapter of the book and why?
Hi, Murph. Oh gosh, my favorite chapter of the book and why. You know, okay, this is going to sound really sad and morbid, but I love the chapter about when my dad died, which is hold on guys, it's the second to last chapter in the book. It is They Got Lost and Were Never Seen Again, chapter 20. So, you know, it talks about my dad's death and a little bit about his funeral, but really it's also about kind of me becoming a writer and the sorts of stories that I used to write, which were really morbid. It tells a hilarious story. It's my favorite story. I mean, this one I did not ask permission for, and my 11-year-old is a little bit upset with me, but I tell a story about her creating a very specific, I won't give it away, and bizarre end of the year book project for her second grade class. and which was also a little bit morbid, and just kind of that, it shows just sort of a connection between, my dad loved to watch scary movies and horror movies. I watched The Exorcist when I was way too young. And so there's just this kind of through line between my dad and then my tendencies, and then I see them in my daughter. And it's just, that's a special chapter for me.
That's a beautiful chapter. It really was. How have you been affected by the pandemic in New York? From Eva outline.
Yes, thanks for that question. A lot. March, April, May, June in New York was really, really rough. And I think that it was rough because we were the only ones, it seemed like, kind of, really dealing with the harsh effects of a lockdown and having so much death and so much fear in the city. Now, I really, honestly, guys, I mean, yes, it is difficult when my children are remote learning in their home and we don't have a separate office or a basement. We don't have a backyard to send them out into. It is hard. It is really hard. But I talk to my friends in Memphis. I talk to my college friends who live in Raleigh and Charlotte and, Winston-Salem, and we're all kind of dealing with the same things. I think that the loneliness, the missing your friends, is really similar no matter where you live. Dealing with being sick of your kids, spending too much time with them, having them be home from school, I think is really, the challenges are very similar no matter where you live. It's a little tougher in New York, but the beauty of New York, where we live especially, we're right across the street from Central Park. Central Park was open. There are huge fields that were open. So even in the harshest days of the pandemic, we were able every day for hours to just leave the house, go outside, rollerblade or scooter or fly kites or throw frisbees. We would see friends out there, and we were outdoors and able to be far away from each other and still kick a soccer ball back and forth. So I think Central Park was a godsend for us. I would say the trickiest thing, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, I didn't really talk much about COVID in the book because the book was really finished before it hit, but was sort of buying enough groceries when it was really difficult to go to the grocery store because the lines were long and you didn't want to have to go every other day. Storing food. My husband would come home with enough food for us for a week or 2 weeks sometimes. And I would say, you do realize we do not have a second freezer. We do not have a pantry. We do not have a basement. We don't have cold storage anywhere for all these potatoes or whatever it was you bought. So we did have some really tricky times storing all the food. But now, you know what, like, there is a real sense of solidarity in New York. You don't get any sort of fights at Costco about mask wearing. Everyone's in a mask. Everyone's on the same page because we lived through it and it was really hard. And so I do feel like in some sense, there's a beautiful solidarity and a sense of community. And those of us who stuck it through and were here the whole time, I know my neighbors better. I know the people in my community better because we really relied on each other. We bought groceries for each other. We took each other meals. So there's a lot of beauty that came out of that tough spring too.
There was one, but I feel like it was fairly short-lived.
Yeah.
A question from Catherine. Do you have a favorite spiritual author or a spiritual Christian book? Well, I kind of feel like I know what the answer to that will be.
You do?
The Bible.
Oh, well, that's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, other than the Bible. Thank you, Catherine, for that question. My friend Catherine. I love Jen Wilkin. She is an amazing Bible teacher and co-son of women's Bible teacher. I think she's brilliant and just relatable. And if anyone has not listened to her speech called Raising an Alien Child, it's a speech, it's not a book, but I'm sure she's written about these topics in other books. But she did a talk about that one year at the Gospel Coalition Women's Conference. You can find it on YouTube. It is essentially a roadmap to how I would like to parent. But I don't know. Tim Keller is a wonderful theologian. He was the founding pastor of the church that we go to. He's wonderful and brilliant too. And there's a lot, but those are two.
All right, just a couple more. This is more of a comment. Your high school principal is so proud of you. So there's that.
Oh, thank you, Miss Fisher.
So this is a question from Kristen. What about your Southern upbringing has been most useful to you living in New York?
Oh, okay. Hi, Kristen. So what about my Southern upbringing is the most useful living in New York? You know, I think this is something I was talking to on a podcast about recently, but the sense of the ease of hospitality that I think Southerners are really good at. Just having people over, loving on them and serving them with food or drinks or whatever it is. That is not something that is necessarily ingrained in the same way in New Yorkers. I mean, because we have such a great restaurant culture and people eat takeout all the time, there's a lot of Southerners who New Yorkers who just don't cook, and we have small spaces. So the idea of having a bunch of people over is not necessarily second nature. So Southerners are great at that, and I love that. And so I feel like, just serving other people through hospitality and going back to the pandemic a little bit, taking meals to people. That's something, my mom anytime she makes something, she makes 2 of it and she freezes it and takes it to a friend or takes it to someone who's had surgery or takes it to someone who has been sick. And I think that is something that I had such a great example of growing up. And so when the pandemic hit, we have a lot of elderly neighbors in our building, and it was just like, or even when a friend has a baby, it's very second nature. I feel like the Southerners are the ones who are making dinner and taking something to someone, and that sense of hospitality and kind of caring through people, especially through food, has served me well.
Apologies for the dog in the background. This is life on Zoom. All right. One more. So what have you learned in New York City that would be useful or helpful to women and mothers living in the South?
Ooh, I think your kids should share rooms. I'm being serious. I'm going to go back to my Jen Wilkin recommendation, The Alien Child. She talks about kids sharing rooms, and she lives in Texas. So I think that the small space aspect, listen, I don't expect anyone living in Memphis to relocate into a 2-bedroom apartment. That would be crazy. But I do think that living in confined spaces in a small space with your kids, while it is highly irritating a lot of the time, my kids are super close, and maybe that's just their personalities. Maybe they wouldn't be otherwise. I don't know. But I think that sharing a room, sort of having to navigate and negotiate space and toys or whatever it is, in that sense, because there's just in close quarters has been good for them, especially as we have been locked down and not seeing friends as much as we normally would have. I'm delighted to know that they actually like hanging out together, which is great. And I kind of know what's going on all the time. I think about all the times in high school, and all of you asking questions were part of these, where we were in a wing of the house and the parents had no idea what we were doing. And we weren't doing anything bad. I'm just saying, nobody knew what we were doing. We were in somebody's playroom over the garage, or we were in this wing of the house and the parents were in that wing of the house, and we were a mile apart. And sometimes I wish I couldn't hear my kids, but I also kind of know what's going on. And it's nice. They're young enough now that I get to hear their little conversations with their friends, and I don't even have to, anyway, it's nice. So I feel like there is, even if I don't want it all the time, there's a closeness between my kids and with my kids that you get in sort of a small space.
Yeah. All right, real quick, last one. Favorite celeb sighting in New York?
Oh gosh. I've had a lot of really good ones. Okay, I'll give you 2. So the first one was at the height of Sex and the City. We're talking when I first moved to New York, Sex and the City was starting, and it was the greatest. And my roommate, Catherine, and I were poor. And so we would order HBO the night Sex and the City started. We'd pay for it through the season, then we'd cut it off because we couldn't afford to have HBO the rest of the year. But we loved Sex and the City, and we saw Sarah Jessica Parker at the Odeon, which is just a fantastic old school New York bistro down in Tribeca. That was a great one. And then I saw Tina Fey walking down the street, which was all I needed. I didn't even need to talk to her. Just seeing her walk down the street, like with her kids. This is in the book, actually, just like walk down the street with her kids on the Upper West Side. She's clearly like rushing to drop somebody off somewhere. But that's a good one.
All right, well, I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole, but I just want to say congrats on the book. It's wonderful. I hope everyone on here will buy one for themselves and 2 or 3 for their friends. Congrats. This was fun, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
That was fun.
Great.
Cheers.
Thank you guys. This was so awesome. Yeah, and what Sid said, if you need 20, 30 copies, you just give Novel a call. I've got a link there. Head over to novelmemphis.com. We will hook you up for sure. I did pick a winner. Random number generator said that lucky number 13, Catherine Tracy, is our winner. So
guys, that's my roommate who was with me when we saw Sarah Jessica Parker.
no,
Catherine.
that's amazing. So you guys are probably already connected. So you can work. I don't have to even loop you in. Well, thank you all for doing this, for being here. These were so much fun, and we'll keep doing these as long as folks are willing to participate. And for those who couldn't make it, if you have friends who you think should see this, everyone probably should. This was recorded, so we will put it up on the Novel Events YouTube page whenever I get that done tomorrow, probably tomorrow afternoon. It will be up there, so feel free to share that around. And yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you guys soon, I hope. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Nicole. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
You'll take care.